Okay, and the second of our videos looking at aggregate demand, we're going to focus this time on the aggregate demand curve. So the AD curve shows a relationship between aggregate demand, C plus I plus G plus X minus M, aggregate demand, and the general price level. Now we're going to be using a two-dimensional diagram space with the general price level on the y-axis and real GDP on the x-axis. Quite a lot of students actually use incorrect labeling on their macro diagrams, and this is something to be aware of. It's really important that you label your ADAS diagrams with the general price level on the y-axis rather than simply price, which you would use in, for example, microeconomics. And please use real GDP or real national output on the x-axis rather than just using quantity as you would do in micro. Also, we use the letter Y for income as our shorthand label on the x-axis rather than Q for quantity. So in macroeconomics diagrams, please label your diagrams accurately. This makes a big difference to your exam performance. The aggregate demand curve, C plus I plus G plus X minus M, normally slopes down from left to right. If we take a given level of prices of GPL1, it's consistent with the level of demand for goods and services produced within a country of Y1. Now, if the price level was to go down, if GPL1 was to fall to GPL2, we'd expect to see an expansion or an extension of aggregate demand. We move down the AD curve. Conversely, if the price level was to go up to GPL3, if prices overall were to be higher, that would cause us to move up the demand curve, causing a contraction of aggregate demand. Now, why does the aggregate demand curve normally seem to be sloping downwards from left to right? There are essentially three main explanations for this. Firstly, something called the real income effect. You see, if prices go down overall, the value of your money in real terms goes up. If you have a given income per year, let's say £20,000 a year, if prices are 3 or 4% lower, then that £20,000 will buy you more. Consumers can afford to buy more of what they need and what they want. So that's called the real money balance effect. Falling prices increases the real purchasing power of money. The second effect relates to the export sector. We call it the balance of trade effect. So if this country's prices, let's say this is the UK, country X, if our prices fall relative to other countries, that could make overseas produced goods and services more expensive in relative terms, causing British firms to sell more goods and services overseas. A rise in exports, of course, adds to aggregate demand. And also those overseas products become relatively expensive compared to UK output. So that could cause a fall in imports. AD is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So if imports go down, aggregate demand goes up. Exports, of course, are an injection into the circular flow. Imports, a leakage, a withdrawal from the circular flow. The third effect really to do with interest rates and monetary policy. If price inflation is low and some prices are falling, that might cause the central bank, in this case the Bank of England, to reduce interest rates, particularly if they have a given inflation target. Now, if interest rates go down, that means there's less incentive to save. Perhaps people will spend a bit more, borrow perhaps a bit more money and spend more. And a fall in interest rates could also cause the external value of the exchange rate to fall. We call that a depreciation. And a depreciation of the exchange rate, other things being the same, a weaker exchange rate makes a country's exports more competitive and could improve export sales. So essentially three reasons why we can assume that the aggregate demand curve slopes downwards from left to right. In the next video, we'll think about what causes shifts in the aggregate demand curve.